Welcome to Thinking in Psychiatry, an Academy by Psych podcast, where we distill new research, translate evidence into practice, and support clinical decision-making for busy clinicians. I'm Dr. Sanil Rege, Consultant Psychiatrist and Content Curator at the Academy by Psych. In this episode, I'm going to walk you through a recent New England Journal of Medicine, NEJM, review titled The Physiology of Hunger by Alessio Fasano. On the surface, hunger sounds simple. Stomach empties, you eat, you feel full. The paper makes it very clear that it is anything but simple. A really fascinating paper, very relevant to psychiatry, particularly not only with medication side effects, but of course, when we think about eating disorders, binge eating disorders, etc., understanding the neuroscience becomes really important. So let's think about what hunger is and how this paper frames hunger. Hunger is framed as an ancient survival system shaped over millions of years and run through multiple overlapping pathways that pull in sight, smell, taste, gut signals, and, crucially, brain circuits. For us as psychiatrists, GPs, mental health clinicians, this is of course not just academic, because dysregulated hunger shows up in practice in obesity and metabolic syndrome, in anorexia nervosa restrictive eating. Increasingly, nowadays, in the way we think about GLP-1 receptor agonists and other appetite-modifying drugs. So this review gives us a way to think about hunger as a brain-gut microbiome system rather than a simple willpower versus weakness story. And that reframing becomes very clinically useful, something that's extremely powerful in psychoeducation to our patients. So let's look at the nature of the study. So this paper is a narrative review. So it's not testing a single intervention. It simply pulls together basic physiology, animal models, human data, and then organizes them into three main systems: homeostatic hunger, hedonic hunger, and third, microbiota-driven hunger. So homeostatic hunger being the classic energy balance system where the gut and the hypothalamus talk to each other about fuel levels. 2, hedonic hunger, the drive to eat for pleasure, comfort, or reward, even when energy needs are met. And third, microbiota-driven hunger, where gut microbes and their metabolites influence the hormones and neural signals that regulate appetite. And towards the end, the paper connects these systems to real conditions: anorexia nervosa, obesity, and the growing use of GLP-1 receptor agonists, particularly in adolescents. So my focus in this podcast is threefold. 1, what do these systems look like? 2, how they show up in real patients. And 3, what they might mean for our prescribing and our psychoeducation. So let's start off with homeostatic hunger. This is the fuel gauge of the body. When the stomach's empty, 2 signals go up to the brain. 1 is mechanical, the lack of stretch in the stomach. The other is hormonal, release of ghrelin, often known as the appetite hormone. Now, both inputs reach the hypothalamus and activate a set of neurons that essentially say we need to eat. Now, those same neurons can be switched off quite quickly. Simply seeing, smelling, or tasting food is enough to start dampening down hunger signals, even before calories are absorbed. That's why anticipation and sensory exposure matter. Other homeostatic inputs include low blood glucose, so the glucose homeostasis. There are other hunger-inhibiting hormones, so you can see here, and rhythmic contractions of the gut between meals, which are linked to a hormone called motilin. Even bitter tastes in the intestine may change motilin release, and with it, the perception of hunger. So once food actually goes in, satiety comes in stages. Early on, there's the stomach stretch, which activates vagal and spinal pathways, which say enough for now. As nutrients move into the small intestine, we have hormones such as GLP-1, CCK, PYY released. These strengthen the satiety signal. And finally, when glucose, amino acids, and insulin rise in the bloodstream, the brain receives a slower message that energy stores have been topped up. All of this is integrated centrally to keep energy balance within a relatively narrow band. Now, let's look at hedonic hunger, which is a different story. Hedonic hunger is the motivation to eat when there is no immediate caloric need. For example, eating sweets after a full meal because they're there, or because we feel stressed or low. So in modern environments with constant access to highly palatable foods, these reward systems are activated often. So essentially, hedonic hunger can override the homeostatic hunger and push us towards high-fat, high-sugar, energy-dense foods. And emotional states matter. Anger, fear, sadness, and depression have all been linked with a higher intake of sweet foods. Interestingly, high hedonic hunger scores do not automatically mean higher food intake or higher BMI, as we can see here. It's unrelated to body composition. This suggests that hedonic hunger interacts with other traits such as impulse control and executive function, which will resonate with many of us working with ADHD or even personality vulnerabilities, where binge eating disorder may be highly comorbid. So hedonic hunger is shaped by learning, memory, and context, and often requires individual rather than one-size-fits-all approaches. The third system is microbiota-driven hunger. The gut microbiota are described as symbionts that help program the immune system, handle energy extraction, and produce metabolites such as short-chain fatty acids, SCFAs. Their impact on hunger appears to work through three main routes. We have hormone modulation. Two metabolites such as short-chain fatty acids can either stimulate or suppress hunger. And then we have peptidomimetics, as stated here. These are certain bacteria that can produce proteins that mimic human hormones. The authors are careful in their interpretations. They suggest that the work is early based on smaller descriptive studies, but of course the signals are really interesting. So integrating this and connecting it to clinical practice, let's ask the question, what might we do differently and how does this help us in our clinical practice? First, it suggests that it's worth taking a moment to differentiate the dominant driver of eating in a given patient. Are we looking at homeostatic hunger, missed meals, high energy output, disturbed sleep, endocrine disease? Or is it more clearly hedonic, eating in response to stress, mood, boredom, or environmental cues? Or does the picture suggest gut-brain involvement, obesity with metabolic syndrome, IBS type features, long-standing dysbiosis? Now, we might not need a long questionnaire, but even asking, does this feel like stomach hunger, stress hunger, or simply because the food's there, can still open up a more nuanced formulation and destigmatize the conversation. Second, around GLP-1 receptor agonists, this review encourages us to keep developmental stage firmly in mind. These drugs clearly improve glycemic control, reduce cardiovascular risk, and promote weight loss by reducing hunger and affecting reward processes. However, they talk about the impact on adolescents. In adolescents, they may interfere with growth and development by reducing energy intake, suppressing appetite, adding anti-hedonic effects, and resulting in fatigue. There are also emerging concerns around misuse in young people with eating disorder vulnerability or in weight-categorized sports. So for younger patients, the message from this paper is caution. Use of GLP-1 sits best in specialist settings with structured monitoring growth, energy, mood, and eating patterns, and with dietitian input. Third, the microbiome story is most useful as a direction of travel. We can safely recommend dietary patterns that improve microbial diversity and metabolic health, more fiber, fewer ultra-processed foods, while being honest based on evidence that specific probiotic strains or FMTs, fecal microbiota transfer, are not yet standard tools for appetite regulation in psychiatry. And finally, in anorexia nervosa, this review supports a biological complement to our psychological models. We can explain to families that there are changes in gut hormones, dopamine and serotonin systems, brain circuits, and the microbiome, and that refeeding and metabolic stabilization are therefore central to treatment, not optional extras. And I think this can make a big difference to eating disorder treatment because of this frame. So let me pull all of this together into clinical pearls and decision-making takeaways. The first pearl, not all hunger is the same. And patients usually know that intuitively. So it's our role to ask and probe so that we get a direction as to which treatment plan we're implementing. Second, framing appetite in neurobiological terms as a product of gut brain or microbiota interacting over time can reduce self-blame and make room for more collaborative work. Third, in adolescents and young adults, any potent appetite-suppressing strategy, this includes stimulants or GLP-1 receptor agonists, should automatically prompt questions about growth, development, fatigue, and eating disorder risk. The decision-making takeaway, in my opinion, is this. We move from seeing appetite as a simple matter of willpower to viewing it as the output of three interacting systems: homeostatic, hedonic, and microbiota-driven. And we try to align our interventions with the dominant system in front of us. Thanks for listening. You can find links to the paper and related Academy modules on your dashboard. In particular, if you want to go deeper into metabolic mechanisms, have a look at our course on antipsychotic medications and metabolic syndrome, where we discuss pathways of metabolic dysfunction in much more detail, and read the link piece on brain insulin resistance as a companion to this episode. I'm Dr. Sanil Rege, and this is Thinking in Psychiatry, where how we think is just as important as what we prescribe. Until next time, keep thinking carefully and thinking clinically. Bye-bye.